Students, welcome to the online classes once more. Do you remember where we stopped last time? Yes, we found that Albert Edward Foreman very clearly replied the vicar that he was too old to start learning how to read and write. In his own words, let me quote him, quote, I'm too old a dog to learn new tricks, unquote. And he did not regret for his inability to read and write. So, students, let's move to the next paragraph. In that case, Foreman, I'm afraid you must go. Yes, sir, I quite understand. I shall be happy to, and in my resignation as soon as you have found somebody to take my place. Here, students, one thing we have to see again, we see the colloquial tone in Foreman's language. Foreman said happy, it means happy. So, students, we find that Foreman proved himself to be a mature person here. He said that he could understand the situation and he would give his resignation as soon as somebody would take his place. Next paragraph. But when Albert Edward, with his usual politeness, had closed the church door behind the vicar and the two churchwardens, he could not sustain the air of unruffled dignity with which he had borne the blow inflicted upon him, and his lips quivered. He walked slowly back to the vestry and hung up on its proper peg his verger's gown. He sighed as he thought of all the grand funerals and smart weddings it had seen. He tidied everything up, put on his coat and hat in his hand, walked down the aisle. He locked the church door behind him. He strolled across the square, but deep in his thoughts, he did not take the street that led him home, where a nice strong cup of tea awaited. He took the wrong turning. He walked slowly along. His heart was heavy. He did not know what he should do with himself. He did not fancy the notion of going back to domestic service. After being his own master for so many years, for the vicar and the churchwardens could say what they liked. It was he that had run St. Peter's Nivelle Square. He could scarcely demean himself by accepting a situation. He had saved a tidy sum, but not enough to live on without doing something. And life seemed to cost more every year. He had never thought to be troubled with such questions. The vergers of St. Peter's, like the popes of Rome, were there for life. He had often thought of the pleasant reference the vicar would make in his sermon at evensong the first Sunday after his death to the long and beautiful service and explanatory character of the late verger, Albert Edward Foreman. He sighed deeply. Albert Edward was a non smoker and a total abstainer, but with a certain latitude, that is to say, he liked a glass of beer with his dinner, and when he was tired, He enjoyed a cigarette. It occurred to him now that one would comfort him, and since he did not carry them, he looked about for a shop where he could buy a packet of gold flakes. He did not at once see one and walked on a little. It was a long street with all sorts of shops in it, but there was not a single one where you could buy cigarettes. Explanation. Students, this is a long paragraph and it is a description where we find a writer's remarks. Students, we have got to know that Albert Edward Foreman had a very charming personality, and now with that personality added with his politeness, he closed the church door that was there behind the vicar and the church wardens. That means the church door was just behind the vestry, and he stood from his place and walked towards the church door and closed them in a very gentle manner. But for a while he could not sustain his feelings that was very clear on his unruffled dignity, the dignity which cannot be ruffled. And he, for a moment, became a weak person. It was like a blow that inflicted upon him to hear all these things. And his lips quivered. Students, quiver means to move very quickly. But he tried his best to be calm and quiet. He never forgot his usual works. He came slowly back to the vestry, put his gown on the peg. Students, peg, do you know what is it? A peg is a small vault, or you can say pin fixed to the wall to keep clothes hanging from it. So Albert Edward Foreman kept his dress, that is versus gown, onto it and was a bit lost in his thoughts. He started thinking that the gown he was leaving would be forever away from him. But the gown had seen, in fact, here the gown is being personified. The gown had seen so many grand funerals and smart weddings.